Chapter 4 is about biodiversity and evolution. The Chapter 4 course case study gets you to start thinking about amphibians, such as frogs, toads, and salamanders. They show great biodiversity. More than 6,700 species exist. But the problem is many populations have declined or vanished. Why is the loss of amphibian populations significant? Well, there are 3 reasons that I hope you will dive into as you read through the course case study. Also, I'd love for you to consider why pharmaceutical companies are interested in the preservation of amphibian species as well. Section 4.1 takes a look at what biodiversity is and why it is important. Sustaining life on the Earth depends on the biodiversity that's found in genes, species, ecosystems, and ecosystem processes. Let's take a closer look. Let's start with species diversity. Species diversity is the number and abundance of species present in different ecosystems, while genetic diversity is the genes that they contain. In other words, the variety of genetic material within a species or a population. Ecological diversity is the variety of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems found in an area or on the Earth, while functional diversity is the biological and chemical processes such as energy flow and matter recycling needed for the survival of species, communities, and ecosystems. What roles do species play in ecosystems? Well, each species has a specific ecological role called its niche or its job. It's what the species does. Specialist species, such as the giant panda that you see in Figure 4.5, have a narrow niche. So take a look at the left curve. While generalist species, such as the raccoon, have a very broad niche. Take a look at the right curve. So there are 4 important roles that a species can play in a particular ecosystem. Number 1, native. That means that they normally live and thrive in that particular ecosystem. Number 2, non-native. They deliberately or were accidentally introduced. Number 3, indicator. They serve as an early warning of environmental change in a community or ecosystem. And number 4, keystone. They have a large effect on the types and abundance of other species in that particular ecosystem. So there's a super cool case study on the American alligator, which is a keystone species in a subtropical wetland ecosystem. It was almost hunted to extinction, so much so that it was placed on the endangered species list. The good news is that today it has been recovered and removed from this list. But why is that such an important success story? I want you to think about that as you read through the case study. And I want you to also think about what non-native invader species is now threatening the American alligator. Another case study that takes a look at a keystone species, the shark, is super interesting as well. So sharks are being degraded by human activities. Over 1 million are killed annually in response to exaggerated media reports on shark attacks. They are also harvested for their fins and for Asian pharmaceutical cure-alls. So do you think sharks should be a protected species? Take a look at the case study and let me know what you think. How does the Earth's life change over time? The theory of evolution, as demonstrated in the process of natural selection, explains how life on the Earth changes over time due to changes in the genes of populations. Population evolution occurs through gene mutation, which gives individuals genetic traits that enhance their ability to survive and produce offspring. Biological evolution by natural selection explains how life changes over time. Through natural selection, species evolve over time from earlier ancestral ones. Individuals with traits that increase their survivability are more likely to produce offspring and pass on these traits. Let's take a look at mutations again. Remember, mutations are changes in genetic composition or in our DNA. Some are random. Others occur by exposure to radioactivity, ultraviolet radiation, and chemicals called mutagens. Genetic changes in reproductive cells are inherited by offspring, and those are referred to as heritable traits. Some heritable traits give individuals advantages that improve their ability to survive and reproduce. Those are referred to as adaptive traits. Let's talk about some common myths about evolution through natural selection. Well, survival of the fittest means survival of the strongest. Well, for biologists, fittest are those that are most reproductively successful and leave the most descendants, not the strongest physically. Evolution explains the origins of life. No, instead, evolution explains how species developed after life began. How about humans evolved from apes or monkeys? No, humans, apes, and monkeys evolved along different paths from a common ancestor. What about evolution by natural selection involves a grand plan of nature in which species are to become more perfectly adapted? Well, there is no evidence of such a plan. Next, let's talk about what factors affect biodiversity. As environmental conditions change, biodiversity is determined by the balance between formation of new species and the extinction of existing species. Human activity has caused loss of biodiversity by causing extinction of species and through degradation of habitats needed for development of new species. Let's talk about how new species arise. So speciation occurs when one species splits into two or more different species. And species are considered different when individuals can no longer breed and reproduce fertile offspring. This can happen as a result of geographic isolation, and that occurs when groups of the same population become physically isolated from one another over time, and that can be by mountains, rivers, roads, or distance. So take a look at the figure. You have an early fox population. Some spread northward and some spread southward, and they were separated. The Arctic fox became adapted to cold through heavier fur, short ears, short legs, and a short nose. The white fur matches the snow for camouflage. Now, different environmental conditions in the south led to the gray fox, which was adapted to heat through lightweight fur, long ears, long legs, and a nose, which gives off more heat. Reproductive isolation occurs when mutation and change by natural selection operate independently in the gene pool of geographically isolated populations. Please let me know if you have any questions.